It is important to closely study our history to help us understand our beliefs about education. The history of education reveals the changing belief system of the times, with the hope that all citizens have access to education designed to meet their needs. Our nation's educational philosophy has grown and changed over time. After completing this chapter, you should have a better perspective on today's issues in education. Educational history helps us understand the flaws of previous approaches to schooling, and it allows us to reform today's system of schooling based on that understanding. The history of education shows how political forces, social class, special interest groups, religion, and cultural and ethnic diversity have influenced schools. Understanding important events in our educational history will help you effectively evaluate proposals for change. Accomplished teachers learn from our nation's past. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, says George Santayana. These themes of contemporary education have been influenced by our history. Universal education for all children, because at first, privileged white males only were allowed to attend schools. Local control of schools, because when the common schools first began, they were run by local school boards and paid for with local tax dollars. Today, No Child Left Behind has greatly influenced the role of federal government in education. And finally, disagreement over the curriculum. Remember that changes in curriculum reflect changes in our society. Many educational practices originated in earlier societies. For example, Egypt, China, and India emphasized practical education in math, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Early Western societies wanted to prepare children for their roles in adulthood. Greek educational goals included a well-rounded development of the mind and body for children. A famous Greek, Socrates, emphasized discussion to promote inquiry. He believed that truth could be discovered by questioning students to see the errors in their thinking. Plato was a student of Socrates. He believed boys and girls should be educated from ages 8 to 16, including music, gymnastics, and mathematics. Aristotle also believed in the need for a strong education for all citizens, but not for women. Roman education was highly influenced by the Greeks. Greeks educated boys and girls ages 7 to 12 learned to read, write, and compute. Upper-class boys ages 12 to 16 attended grammar school to learn Greek or Latin literature. Boys ages 16 to 20 went to school to learn dialect, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. During the medieval period, the Roman Catholic Church had the greatest influence on education. However, feudalism did not allow for the growth of schools. During the Renaissance, humanists wanted to transfer wealth and power from the church to the people. They believed education should consist of 7 liberal arts, including grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. The 18th century is known as the Age of the Enlightenment because scientific inquiry and reasoning were being used to improve society. Rousseau believed that children progress through stages of growth, and knowledge of child development should influence instructional strategies. Pestalozzi believed that curriculum material should be selected in the light of students' natural abilities, moving from the simple to complex. Pestalozzi also wanted to develop healthy self-esteem in children. Due to rapid population growth, the monitorial system was developed, where older students tutored younger students. This meant that fewer teachers were actually needed in the classroom. Education in colonial America was based on England's 2-track system. Lower-class children attended only elementary-level schooling to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. Upper-class males could attend Latin grammar schools to learn to read, write, and speak in Greek and Latin. The primary purpose of schools was to learn to read the Bible and to learn the religious catechisms. Education in the colonies varied greatly due to the diversity of settlers as well as differences in geography. School terms were short and attendance was sporadic because children were needed to work on the family farms. Religion played a very powerful role in how schools were organized and what they taught. At this time, most teachers were male. Respect for teachers was low. Teachers were paid little, but pay was increased with the age of the students. Teachers were also expected to have a high moral character. The New England colonies included Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. In New England, the church, state, and schools were interrelated. Town schools were created through laws. For example, the Old Diluter Satan Act required that every town with 50 households appoint and pay a teacher to teach children how to read and write. In the New England colonies, teaching and school routines were harsh and based on dogma. The middle colonies were New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. The middle colonies were very diverse religiously, so parochial schools were established. Separation of church and state was an accepted and common practice. Schools were the responsibility of churches rather than the government. The middle colonies were also highly involved in trade, so curriculum emphasized practical and classical subjects. Students learned reading, writing, grammar, arithmetic, bookkeeping, geography, history, music, and religion. Education in the southern colonies was influenced by the rural landscape. People lived far apart, so local schools were not possible. Plantation owners hired tutors for their children, and wealthy males could finish their education abroad. Poor white farmers had no available education. They could not afford tutors, nor did their farming lifestyle allow for time to attend school. Education for slaves was illegal because they feared it would lead to rebellion. At the Emancipation Proclamation, the literacy rate of slaves was only 5%. Early education efforts were seen in the form of dame schools, open to both boys and girls in the home of a widow or a housewife. Students only learned basic reading and arithmetic, and frequently used hornbooks to learn the alphabet. Boys could only attend the reading and writing school. They read the Bible, religious catechisms, and the New England Primer. The New England Primer gave children stern religious warnings about proper life conduct. In the New England colonies, the Puritans realized they needed a way to educate community leaders, so they established Latin grammar schools. Sons of the upper social classes could study Latin and Greek as well as the Bible. These schools were designed to prepare male students ages 8 to 16 for college. Latin grammar schools were the forerunner to the U.S. high school. Only a small number of wealthy privileged boys could attend, because college preparation was not practical for life on the frontier. Latin grammar schools elected a board of townspeople to make decisions and were financially supported by the attendees. This board was similar to today's school boards. The first colleges available in the colonies were modeled after Cambridge and Oxford in England. These schools were only for students of wealthy families and taught a liberal arts curriculum. Their purpose was to create an educated elite to lead the colonies. Students who attended higher education would become the colony's doctors, lawyers, and clergy. Puritans realized that schools could strengthen and preserve religious beliefs. So in 1647, the Old Diluter-Stainton Act was passed that required towns of 50 households to pay a teacher of reading and writing. Prior to this, the Massachusetts Act of 1642 required that each town determine if children could read and write. If they could not, parents could lose custody of their own children. During the Revolutionary period, schools and education saw a huge decline in European influence. The country's need for agriculture and commerce greatly influenced school curriculum. And leaders of the new country saw the need for educated citizens to protect freedoms and participate in the economy. Anyone who could afford to go was admitted, and the school was generally secular. The curriculum was more practical than the Latin grammar school, and focused on the English language, foreign languages, writing, geography, and accounting. Sarah Pierce began a female academy to train girls for duties at home. Little education was available to girls in the 17th and 18th centuries. However, in the 19th century, female seminaries were opened to provide higher education to women and to train women for public service outside of the home. During the Age of Enlightenment, people viewed education as a natural right. People saw the benefits of using reason and scientific inquiry to improve their lives. Thomas Jefferson was a proponent of public education. He believed that a free society needed educated, moral citizens to maintain the democracy. American textbooks were seen as a way to unite the country, promote democratic ideals, and enhance patriotism. Noah Webster created the American Spelling Book as a way to teach the American language and promote moral values. His book was seen as an elementary curriculum guide. The first state-supported high school was the Boston English Classical School that was established in 1821. This began the Common School movement. Horace Mann was a champion of public education, a leader of the Common School movement, and an advocate of teacher education. Common schools were designed to teach a common body of knowledge to all students. Because common schools were seen as responsible for the moral development of children, it was believed that religion could not be completely separated from education. For this reason, there was much debate about the curriculum, particularly between Catholics and Protestants. The growth of the common school led to the need to have highly qualified teachers. Horace Mann promoted a professional school known as Normal School to train teachers. Catherine Beecher promoted equal opportunities for women and encouraged women to become teachers. Normal schools consisted of general knowledge courses, courses in pedagogy, and a practice teaching experience. Another American textbook was the McGuffey Reader. These books were leveled by difficulty for grades 1 through 6. They taught reading and moral values such as hard work, honesty, truth, charity, and obedience. The growth of public schools was hastened by the Northwest Ordinance Acts of 1785 and 1787. These acts stated that the 16th section of each township was to be set aside for public schools to teach religion, morality, and produce a good government. From the 17th to 20th century, schools for African Americans were segregated. In the North, some schools were established for free blacks. In the South, many states made educating slaves a crime. The Kalamazoo case was a Supreme Court decision that stated that local school boards could tax the local citizens to support the schools. This established a precedent for publicly funded schools. The Morrill Land Grant granted states 30,000 acres of land to establish colleges for agriculture or mechanics. These schools provided a more practical curriculum than the first colonial colleges such as Yale, Harvard, and William and Mary. After the Civil War, common schools spread and compulsory attendance laws were implemented in 32 states. School systems began to take on organizational features that still appear in today's schools. For example, centralized control, increasing authority for superintendents, a division of labor between teachers and administrators, and scientific management of schools. After the Civil War, early childhood education also began to grow. Friedrich Froebel, a German, is known as the father of kindergarten. He saw kindergarten as a garden where children grow and develop through play, games, stories, music, and language activities. Initially, kindergartens were privately funded. The first public kindergarten opened in 1873. After the Civil War, schools for former slaves were opened by African American communities. Booker T. Washington believed that education could improve the lives of African Americans. He understood the realities of the Jim Crow South and funded the Tuskegee Institute, which focused on career and technical training as a way for African Americans to participate in the economy. Not everyone agreed with Washington. W.E.B. Du Bois believed that African Americans should not only be trained for manual jobs. He believed that the talented tenth of the population should receive a liberal arts education in preparation for becoming community leaders. The Committee of 10 focused on high school curriculum, believing that it should consist of Latin, Greek, English, modern languages, math, physics, astronomy, biology, botany, history, government, and geography. The Committee of 15 organized elementary curriculum into 5 subjects of grammar, literature, arithmetic, geography, and history. The spread of women's education is closely related to the common school movement. We needed educated teachers, mostly who were unmarried women. Women were chosen to become teachers because they could be paid significantly less than their male counterparts. It was not until after World War II that women were allowed to marry. In recent years, women have gained greater access to careers in academic administration. Emma Willard was the first woman superintendent of education. Jane Addams, who taught in Chicago, linked schools with social service agencies. From 1889 to 1920, America experienced great change with industrialization, urbanization, and rapid immigration. The public was concerned with how to address social issues and changing educational needs, which led to the Progressive Era. Women's suffrage and workers' rights were also critical reforms taking place. Progressive education was about educating students for democratic living and improving the quality of life for everyone. Progressives were opposed to lessons based on textbooks and rote memorization. In addition, they opposed discipline based on fear and physical punishment. Progressives believed that teachers should be guides to help students as they actively construct their own knowledge. John Dewey is probably the most influential educator of the 20th century. He participated in political causes such as women's rights and the unionization of teachers. He believed students should be active participants in their own learning, that students learn by doing, and that student interest should drive the curriculum. He also believed that schools should teach children how to live and work with others. Finally, Dewey believed that students should participate in decision-making and that schools should be integrated into real life. Maria Montessori was an Italian educator who greatly influenced curriculum and instruction in preschool and primary school settings. She believed that each child is unique, so education should be individualized for each child. She also believed that children are not educated by others, but rather educate themselves. She recommended using a prepared environment in which children can do things for themselves. Montessori believed that teachers should make the children the center of learning, be keen observers, and provide children with freedom within that prepared environment. Above all, Montessori emphasized respect for each child. Progressivism fell out of favor following World War II during the Cold War. The Soviets' launch of Sputnik in 1957 became a symbol of what U.S. education failed to achieve. Progressivism was abandoned for a more authoritarian approach and strict adherence to lecture and rote learning. A new wave of essentialism took over, and schools focused on the task of preparing students for the technological and engineering challenges of the time. Educational progressivism was revived during the 1960s as the child-centered movement gained popularity. This included whole language reading, multi-age approaches, problem-based learning, and student-centered instruction. At the beginning of our history, Native American education focused on confinement and assimilation. The post-Civil War goal was to have Native Americans give up their culture and accept middle-class American values. Therefore, off-reservation boarding schools were opened. Some believed in this saying, "Kill the Indian to save the man." Education bore no relationship to reservation life and forced Native American children to reject their families and way of life. Today, we try to educate Native Americans in the context of their culture, while respecting their values and beliefs. Mary McLeod Bethune, the daughter of a former slave, advocated for education for female African Americans. In 1904, she founded the Daytona Normal School. She was a strong advocate for civil rights and helped found the NAACP with W.E.B. Du Bois. Their goal was to help African Americans secure their rights under the Constitution. World War II created conditions that led the federal government to become more involved in education. As more women began working outside the home to support the war effort, the Lanham Act was passed. It provided training for workers in war plants, construction of schools near military workers, and childcare for working families. The GI Bill of Rights also provided educational funding for veterans, including housing and tuition assistance. This changed the makeup of the college students as they returned home from war. We began to see college students who were older and more experienced. In the post-war era, a series of judicial and social events, including the civil rights movement, has left Americans asking questions about public education. For example, how can full and equal education be offered to everyone? What knowledge and skills should be taught? And how should the curriculum be taught? The 1960s and 1970s were periods of intense anti-communism dominated by the nuclear arms race with Russia. Politicians and educators were determined to keep up with the Soviet Union. In 1958, the U.S. government passed the National Defense of Education Act. Universities received grants to develop national math and science curriculum. Teachers attended summer institutes to learn how to better teach math and science. The focus was on an essentialist, teacher-led curriculum to address the technological and engineering challenges of the day. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that separate schools for whites and blacks were inherently unequal, which required desegregation with all deliberate speed. Over the following decades, many school systems tried to eliminate de facto segregation, or segregation by neighborhood. The 1964 Civil Rights Act reinforced equal opportunity for all Americans regardless of race, gender, or ethnicity. The most extensive federal financing of schools was made possible by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. It ensured immediate federal assistance would be provided to poor schools. Title I and Head Start are two programs that developed to ensure better opportunities for disadvantaged students. Another amendment to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act occurred in 1968 and is known as Title VII. This law provided funds for bilingual education to meet the needs of non-English speaking students. The 1970s brought on an era of teacher accountability and increased access to public school programs. Title IX was passed in 1972, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. Title IX requires that schools provide equal opportunities, funding, and facilities for both boys and girls. In 1975, Congress passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This act opened the schools to all students regardless of their ability. In 1983, the U.S. Department of Education issued a report titled A Nation at Risk. The report called for tougher standards for graduation, increased requirements for the number of math and science courses, and a return to academic basics. This report brought increased attention to skills and standards, and less emphasis on progressive concerns. Accountability continued in the 90s as schools tried to deal with greater diversity and less support for public education. Teachers began assuming leadership roles and schools began restructuring. Currently, we are in an era of standards and assessment. Supporters of national standards believe that all schools need to set higher standards for students as a way of promoting both equality and excellence. Opponents argue that national standards overstep government authority and don't reflect local needs or values.